Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. For it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church.
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites.
Jésus, par ton sang précieux, enlève mon iniquité. Regarde-moi sur les cieux, dis-moi que tu m'as pardonné. J'ai longtemps erré cœur rebelle, mais j'entends ta voix qui m'appelle. Au pied de ta croix maintenant, tout confus, brisé, je me rends. Blanc, blanc, plus blanc que neige, blanc, plus blanc que neige, lavé dans le sang de l'agneau, je serai plus blanc que la neige.
Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. 1 Samuel 15.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. It is my honor and my privilege to welcome you to this 5th episode of GodIsNotWhite.com. My name is Jafrica Haiti, and it is indeed good to be able to count on your presence on a weekly basis for this our program. Today we will be discussing the beginning of Christianity as we understand it to have occurred. And of course, given that I am not a biblical scholar, not someone that spent hours and years studying religion, I absolutely invite you to identify where I would have maybe erred in the sharing of factual information or even in the analysis of the information that I was able to gather. I encourage you to type on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, your comments and your suggestions, of course, for improvement of this program. Now, today, as we proceed, and as is usually the case, I'm going to share with you a set of slides that essentially summarize the content of the presentation today. And again, I will count on your alertness to bring to my attention things that maybe I should revisit in the next episode as we proceed. Okay, so I greet you from Ottawa, Gatineau. This is where I'm located. But as for those of you who followed this program earlier, I am a son of Africa born in Haiti. And as I presented in the earlier episodes, I was introduced to Christianity while I was growing up in Haiti. And this is very central to the content of this presentation, God is Not White. Again, please like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. I produce this program in English on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. It's live, and then of course it stays on the channel, and you can revisit the programs at your leisure anytime, activating the audio as well as the video, whichever way you prefer to listen to the program or watch the program. And on Sundays, every Sunday at noon, we have a Haitian Creole language program called Cause Nef Tankou Zefre, where we receive guests from the Haitian community inside of Haiti or outside to express their experiences in terms of growing up in Haiti and their current connection with the nation as it is going through some very, very difficult period in its existence. All right, and so today, the fifth episode, How Was Christianity Established, is essentially the title of our presentation. Of course, I start here with some images from the Ethiopian Orthodox faith that currently has one of the oldest versions of the Christian Bible in circulation. We will discuss the actual content of the Bible and the creation of the Bible and all of that process in future episodes. Today, we are dealing really with the process by which the religion was established. For those of you who were there, you know that this work is really based on my published book from 2000, the year 2000, Vive Bon Dieu à bas religion, literally translated into Praise God down with religion. But of course, we will in every episode speak about what has been published since 2000 in the past, basically 25 years, as there are people who are covering a lot of the topics that we had addressed in Vive Bon Dieu à bas religion. And so we gave you a sense of why we say praise God, since we say praise God down with religion. And we spoke about in the previous episodes why we say God is mother of life and knowledge. And then we asked the question what God we're talking about, and then we said, what is this idea that God has a chosen people? And last week we looked how Christianity arrived in Haiti, this particular grounding of my own upbringing as a so-called quote-unquote Christian. And so today, the exercise will lead us to raise a few eyebrows with statements such as Jesus was Jewish, not Christian. So, Jésus pas chrétien. Indeed, Jesus was not Christian. And this is not something that we're going to rely on other books for. It's actually the Jesus of the Bible that we're referring to here. And because, of course, the Christian faith proposes that the actual individual known as Jesus is a human being who actually came to earth, lived, was born like every other human being. Therefore, there is a quest for the historical Jesus, and we will talk about that. There's been, in fact, some of the historians and scholars speak about 3 separate quests for the historical Jesus, and you will see that these informed our work in Vive Bon Dieu à bas religion, as the actual 3rd quest was in the heart of their efforts while I was publishing and researching for Vive Bon Dieu à bas religion. And then we asked the question, why would the son of David be a threat to authorities? Again, pointing to the fact that the history of Christianity is something that Christians, people who adopt the faith, seldom get to be acquainted with, or get taught, or research or study. Rather, the faith itself, the dogma, the content of the faith is what they study, but rather than the history of how Christianity came to be. And that's why, while doing this research and writing about it, I find it quite fascinating how much information is actually quite available, but is completely absent from teachings, at least in the churches, and certainly not in school as people were growing up. The things were just presented to us as a dogma that is to be accepted without question. And so, it goes without saying that, if you're talking about Christianity, it is assumed that the primary actor or person is the Jesus, right? Who was presented as a human being who lived around the first century. Now, whether it is the people who wrote in the books that became known as the Gospel, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in what is now known as the Bible, whether it is in the work of the first historians of Christianity, like Josephus, the Jewish writer, or others, or Josephus, I guess in different languages they pronounce the name differently, or Ernest Renan, who is identified as being part of the first quest for the historical Jesus, or the members of the third quest who formed this group called the Jesus Seminar, who are quite prominent in the work of Vive Bon Diable Religion, our book. These people agree with the basic principles that, okay, Jesus was Jewish, he was part of the people they consider to be Semites, and that he practiced Judaism, and used the Torah, the books of Moses, as sacred book, as sacred writing, and revelations from the God that they believed in as he was growing up, and that God is considered to be a universal God who, created everything, but is particularly the God of the particular peoples who are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the ancestors of the Jewish people. Jesus is said to have lived between the periods of 6 before the Common Era, BCE, and 30 of the Common Era. These are just, large parameters of agreement. And according to most of these writers, just like all other Jews of his time, Jesus lived under Roman occupation. That was the period that Rome occupied Palestine, and he lived under the cultural influences of the Greeks, because Alexander the Greek had invaded the Palestine region since 332 BC. So that's the context, I believe, that is very important for us to understand why, when people went to search for the historical Jesus, it was clear that some of the statements that are in the Bible can make sense if you understand that political environment in which the person identified in the Bible as an actual human being who lived did and said certain things, and why, when you analyze it, you will come to certain conclusions and not others. And so it's not a point of contention that Jesus was Jewish and not Christian. In fact, Authors such as the Senegalese researcher Sheikh Anta Diop brings to our attention some very important facts, such as that the term Christos came from the Greek, which took it from Kershesheta, from the African language of Kemet or Egypt. Okay, so Christ is not a term that is specifically identified to the person named Jesus. There were many Christos before, and it simply means, the anointed one, the one that the people, the deliverer that the people were looking for, etc. And there were many Christ before Jesus. Okay, so what we are told, though, is that the word Christianity, now to describe the religion, is derived from Old French chrétienté, which means Christendom or spiritual authority. It links to baptism. And the earliest known use of the noun Christianity, from what you can check on Wikipedia, etc., is in the Middle English period. So we're talking very late that the term Christianity became coined. And so that's important to set the table like that, because when we're going to talk about why people thought it's necessary to look for the historical Jesus, unless you understand that some of this terminology that we take for granted and that we use today are relatively new. Okay, we're talking about 1200. That's like years, like decades, even centuries after the person named Jesus would have died, under whose name they say they created the faith or the religion. So indeed, I say that Jesus was Jewish, and so given the context of where he was growing up, you even have inside of the Bible some of the references, such as in Mark 15 or in Matthew 27, that indicate that the Romans were actually making fun of him, calling him King of the Jews, and putting that on the cross where he was killed. Now, how much of this is historical or things that actually happened or that was created later on? Again, that's the work of the scholars who are trying to separate the two things and understand which is which. That is, the person that is now part of the Christian faith that they call Jesus Christ. So those two words are tied together to mean one person. That is the human being who would have come to earth by magical means of God impregnated a human female in the person of Mary, and then that person being actually God and therefore having a divine personality. Now, people find that it is actually important to understand, when you read the books that refer to Jesus, can we actually, everybody know that there are magicians on earth today. Like, David Blaine is one. There are all kinds of people who do things that don't seem normal. And so, of course, Jesus was said to have turned water into wine, have walked on water, had raised the dead. So there's the question of, whether these things actually happen. But if they happen, they need to leave evidence, right? But the basic evidence of the existence of such a person during that period of time is what the scholars are still trying to decipher. And now I remind you that there are people who live way earlier than Jesus, like the pharaohs of ancient Kemet or Egypt. Plenty of information about many of them. Of course, for those people also, In addition to the archaeological finds, they are looking for other evidence to corroborate the information. And of course, they keep on making corrections from what they had thought in the past. And it's the same thing for Bible scholars. Uh, However, we must tell you that um many folks take for granted the information that was passed down and never really question whether Jesus, or later on even Jesus Christ, uh, was actually a person who actually lived. I contrast here these two pictures because one is an actual picture, the other one is the work of imagination, the one in color, that is. Um, Charlemagne Perrault, who was attacked by the invading US forces in Haiti. We know exactly how and who attacked him and killed him on October 31st, 1919, and then placed him on a door and paraded his corpse in order to frighten the Africans of Haiti uh, all day November 1st, 1919. Now that's actuality, that's known. Whereas when it comes to the picture on the left, there is no date for when this event would have occurred. And of course, the way the most of us have seen the main actors, Jesus, his mother, his sister, his disciples, portrayed are absolutely they don't make sense for the period of time that was identified. All these white people would not have been present because that area of the world, yes, it did have white people because the Romans had occupied the area, but those who would have been the natives or the Palestinians of the area would be dark-skinned individuals. And some of them very much folks who came from the heart of Africa, who had occupied all of that region, whether it is Iraq, all of this area. But that's not the point, though. We are here talking about the person that is in the Christian Bible. And therefore, these are, I guess, cues that tell us that, clues, I would say, that something is not fitting well with reality from that other image. And so the historical Jesus, people are looking for him because when they look at the book of Mark, which is considered to be the first gospel, and then they look at the others that seem to be copying from Mark, they're saying, well, okay, then who wrote these things? Because again, that's another part that needs to be understood. When you do a little bit of reading, you find out that no, there were no individuals named Matthew, Mark, John, Luke. These are names that were created, just like when you're writing a play, you give names to the characters, and these are names that came way after and that don't correspond to actual writers who wrote. And some of these folks, when they write, and we will see that as we go closer to look into the Bible and we ask the question, whose fingerprints we see in the Bible? And so they're trying to say, okay, these scholars, especially those who were involved in the first and second quest, they were trying to say, okay, this we cannot trust, but given this other saying, because it matches some of these other sayings in the other gospels and in the books that were rejected by the leaders of the church later on, and they look at what's happening in historical context, okay, then they identify a sentence. And these are scholars who vote, okay, this we can trust. And that's how they're trying to create a so-called historical Jesus. And so you see the names of some of these individuals and you can look them up. to familiarize yourself with them. Essentially, that so-called historical Jesus is a personality that biblical scholars were trying to create out of their own wisdom and out of their own understanding of trying to say, okay, a lot of the stuff that they taught us in church don't make sense because, for instance, in the Catholic Church, they claim that the 5 books that are attributed to Moses were written by Moses himself, and the book describes the actual funeral of Moses, which absolutely makes no sense. And at the time, the Catholic Church didn't need to resort to much other strategies. It wasn't a academic debate for them. They just declare you anathema. That is, you are an enemy of the church if you dare claim that no, it cannot make sense that Moses would have written about his own funeral. And that's how these things were forced and established as dogma of the church, including the divinity of Jesus, which was voted on, the humanity of Jesus, which was voted on, and then the humanity and divinity of Jesus at the same time, which was also voted on. That's how those things happen. And so these scholars took a kind of a similar strategy where they used their own wisdom to vote what subtract of the Christian ideology or history or story they could consider to be real, factual evidence of a human being that lived and that fits the description of the son of the carpenter, etc. And so Ernest Renan tried to merge the gospel narratives with his own psychological interpretations. And he basically spoke about a Jesus who preached a sweet theology of love in Galilee, but turned into a revolutionary once he encountered the establishment in Jerusalem. Again, keep in mind, Palestine is under Roman occupation. That's the context to understand when they're referring to revolutionary Jesus. The second quest is very much influenced by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran rolls. Those things were discovered between 1946 and 1956. But scholars identify the second quest for the historical Jesus having started, according to them, at a conference in 1953 at an annual gathering of alumni of the University of Marburg. And so many of the scholars involved in that second quest for the historical Jesus are Germans. They tell you, for instance, that Kasselman advanced the position that although the Gospels may be interpreted for theological purposes, they still contain historical memories which can yield information about Jesus. This perspective effectively began what was then known as the New Quest and later came to be called the Second Quest for the historical Jesus. It's a very fascinating read when you take a look at the work of these people because the Dead Sea Scrolls, they contain references to the actual Gospels that we now have, but they also have other Gospels that the church rejected, the Roman church, way after Jesus would have been killed and replaced, and the faith created in his name that he never knew himself. Okay, and so those scrolls that were translated into English and all kinds of other languages are an interesting read. The third quest, like I mentioned, is what people may be more familiar with, and you had people like John Dominic Crossan, who was regularly featured in those TV programs that came out exactly around the same time I was publishing Vive Bon Dieu à Bas Religion. So it was really fascinating for me to be watching those programs on TV where scholars are telling you that they're walking on the steps, and some of them are very fanatical. They absolutely want to find some archaeological evidence of Jesus, but all of these quests came up with very little new information that could, confirm that a human being actually lived, and his name was Yeshua, and he was the son of, this man whose wife came to him and said, "I am pregnant, but it's not for you, but you need to accept it," etc., etc. Now, of course, in addition to the folks who are actually studying the Bible, there are others who also do research to look at what other mythology existed that could have influenced those who were writing the Jesus story. Okay, and so you can see also in the third quest an element that started to come out, and you will see that in Vive Bon Dieu par religion. That is a sense that Jesus is not really the primary character of Christianity. Because, like I said, he was born a Jew, lived as a Jew, was killed while a Jew, okay, and was even mocked as King of the Jews, right? But rather, a man named Paul is someone that we will be talking about more in the next episodes, and you will see why there is a sense that Christianity owes much more to Paul than to Jesus himself. So they say that the third quest yield new insights into Jesus's Palestinian and Jewish context, and not so much on the person of Jesus himself. It also made clear that all material on Jesus has been handed down by the emerging church, raising questions about the criterion of dissimilarity, because that's one of the criteria that they use before they vote in this Jesus seminar about what they can consider to be actual words of Jesus, or what they would reject. In any case, I really encourage folks to go look at some of these videos that were published on many of the US television in the year 2000 and later on. Now, of course, many of the players who were involved in the Jesus seminar have now passed. There are many critics of their methodology, people who criticize their conclusions, saying that they studied with a bias. Again, this is scholars disputing from their own perspective. And like I said, I came to this with a different background. Really, it's just that I was trying to identify with that theology, and the more I dig, the more it didn't look like me. It didn't seem to resonate with my own experience as a displaced African growing up in the Caribbean. But again, this was a very fascinating intellectual work. Okay, another question. Why would the son of David be a threat to authorities? When we go look closer into why Christianity, we say, owe more to Paul than to Jesus, well, then we will get a better sense of how Jesus is portrayed in the Acts of the Apostles and the Gospels themselves. And that is important, because you need to look at the historical context that is provided in the Gospels that became known as the Bible. It's interesting, though, that although in the same set of books, they claim that Jesus is of divine origin and that in reality, he is the Son of God. Therefore, was Mary, his mother, was impregnated by divine intervention, not by the human action of Joseph, the husband of Mary. So therefore, the spermatozoid of Joseph doesn't have anything to do with the existence of the biblical Jesus. Nonetheless, when they do the genealogy of Jesus as they present it in the Bible, look what we have. Okay, so they say he came all the way from the line of David, and from the line of David, he is linked through Joseph. But what's the point of doing a genealogy via Joseph if the story says that he has nothing to do with Joseph? Okay, through Mary, he's also related to David and to Levi. And that's very important because if you understand that it was under the period of occupation, of Roman occupation, then that would explain why the son of David would be a threat to the authorities. Because when the Romans occupied Palestine or the Judea, they established a puppet leader, okay, king of the Jews, who, of course, and that's why when they say the period of when Jesus was born, although there are scholars who dispute how it could be because that period of time, it doesn't make sense. But Herod would, of course, feel threatened by someone being called the son of David, because according to the Jewish law, okay, to their faith, the king of the Jewish people should be a descendant of David, and Herod was not. Herod was a de facto leader imposed on the Jewish people, okay, on the Palestinian people by the Romans. And so that's why Jesus, being a descendant of David, would be a threat to the authorities. But he's a double threat, because here, if you look at the genealogy through Mary, he's also a descendant of Levi. And the descendants of Levi would be the priest. And that's why the high priest also felt threatened by Jesus as a religious leader. Because as a descendant of Levi, his words had clout in the temple. Okay, supposedly. But of course, when you are under occupation, it's like the U.S. If the U.S. would, carry their threat to make Canada the 51st state, they would, President Trump, or I don't know if he would name himself king or whatever, in Trump land, he would name someone to rule Canada on his behalf, and he wouldn't care about what Canadian tradition would have been. He would decide that, so-and-so should be the governor of Canada, and so it would be. And of course, anybody who would be part of the resistors or the people who are Canadian nationalists would constitute a threat to whoever the puppet that Donald Trump would have chosen. That's what the situation was as described in the Christian Bible for the time of Jesus. And so you see here in the book of Matthew, I believe this is in Matthew 21, they say Jesus stormed inside of the temple and said, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." So you see, he's in the temple speaking with authority, again, as a descendant of Levi and as a descendant of David, as it's describing there. But when the chief priest and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did and the children shouting in the temple courts, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant. "Do you hear what these children are saying?" they asked him. "Yes," replied Jesus. "Have you never read, from the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise. Again, if you look in the book, we presented the map of the Roman Empire at that time, and it makes perfect sense why this conflict would have existed between the Jews who are part of the elite and this person who is claiming to be a descendant of David and a descendant of Levi through his mother's side of the genealogy. Okay, there is plenty more that we could have covered tonight. I just wanted to do this and present you some references. The books by Ernest Renan, published first in French, are also available in English. I mean, we're talking here, someone who was writing in the 1800s, but it's still interesting to see how people were thinking about, making the distinction between Christ and Jesus. And later on, we saw the Dead Sea Scroll Deception, the book by Michael Bagent and Richard Lee. And Michael Bagent is also someone who writes quite a lot during that period of time about the history of Christianity. Another good book to look at is The Bible and Christianity, The Real Origins by Scott Bistrop. The Bible, the Quran, and Science, the Holy Scriptures Examined in the Light of Modern Knowledge by Maurice Bucaille. The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality by Sheikh Anta Diop. And of course, my own publications that you can also find from my website, God is Not White. Next week, we will be looking at Paul. Yes, you know the story. This guy was a persecutor of the followers of Jesus. And somehow, he became a leader of the church. And many people have noticed that in the actual New Testament, the segment of the Bible that addresses the life and the teaching of Jesus, they actually include more teachings of Paul than of Jesus. So yeah, definitely Paul is Christian, but not Jesus. Jesus was born a Jew, lived as a Jew, got killed as a Jew according to the Bible. And after he was so murdered, his followers claimed that he rose from the dead. And that's when you can start talking about a Christian sect, okay, within the Jewish tradition. These were all Jews. But then this group of Jews claimed that their own leader, who was arrested by the occupation forces, the Romans, killed, they claimed that he has resurrected and therefore presented himself as the Messiah. But he himself, in his lifetime, in terms of what he was doing, as we will read later on in the actual text of the Bible, interpretation claims that he, of course, was the leader of the church. But again, it's a factual thing that there are more statements attributable to Paul than to Jesus. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as we will continue to contrast the behavior of Jesus as seen in the Gospels and the behavior of Paul. And in addition, as some of the scholars involved in the Jesus Seminar has done, you will see a little bit more about the conflict that existed between some of the leaders of the church, of the Jewish faith that Jesus belonged to, and Paul. namely between the mother of Jesus, Mary, and his close associates, including Mary Magdalene, James, ou Jacques en français, the brother of Jesus, so identified in the Bible, in the Gospels, and Paul. These people clashed, and some of this you can see in the book titled The Acts of the Apostles. But the scholars have studied this to find further information about why there was this clash between Paul and the other followers of Jesus, including the closest associates, his mother, his sister, his brother, and other followers. This is fascinating work, and so I invite you to join us next week for more of God is Not White. Of course, as you can see in the book, we did use some of the paintings, and many of these paintings came to us from the European tradition. By the time that we reach to this period of time, Christianity is so Europeanized, it's very difficult for folks to even imagine the characters described in the Bible as anything other than white Europeans. But again, we remind you that this is not because other descriptions do not exist. It simply is a question of domination of the space by European-made literature, and the Europeans have basically turned this thing into their own thing. Okay, it's their Jesus, and they made it to their liking. That said, when you look at the iconography in the Orthodox Ethiopian Church, it is also things that were created years and years after that period during which they claim a human being named Jesus, son of Mary and of Joseph, would have lived. And so we will have to take some time to look at those periods immediately after the year 33 AD, which is identified as the period where the crucifixion would have taken place, and then to look at what happened during that period of time. They claim that the Gospels were written. We're talking about hundreds of years, okay? But again, and we will ask the question, when we read those Gospels, we know the church tells us that these were inspired by God. That is, human beings took their pen and started writing, but they're not writing whatever they think. They're writing inspired by the Holy Spirit, and something called the Holy Spirit, which is perfect, which is godly, which is divine. And so we will, take a closer look with our magnifying glass to see, and then, what kind of fingerprints do we see when we investigate those words in this compilation of books. We will also look at the historicity of the Bible, because as you know, this is a book, right? I can tell you that this book did not exist before April 2000. It could not have existed because as a material thing, there was a time it did not exist, and then it came to be. And it is through the action of a human being, namely myself, who did the research and then published the book. It is no different from the things that we are referring to now, like the King James Version of the Bible and all the other versions that came before that. And just like when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, even they, you can identify, you can do carbon dating to find out, what is the earliest time that these things could have existed, because the paper on which it is written could not have existed before such and such a date. So it is very important to do this kind of work, to be able to understand the frame of mind of the individuals who actually wrote those things. And it is also important, I don't think it's trivial, to know what kind of character was that of these individuals. And you'd be very surprised by actions that were committed by some of the people that are fathers of the church. And it is those people who decided what constitutes the Word of God. Very interesting things to ponder and to investigate in the coming weeks. And so I really encourage you to bring some of your own thinking to the table. Sister Marinadine Pierre says, "Dear brother, I don't believe that these people were called Jews during that time. I think that they were referred to as Israelites. The faith is a Jewish faith. The area was called Judea, but I'm willing to investigate further here." I'm trying to see if anybody else had some new comments. Again, I would encourage you to share and share some links to information that is coming out. Again, like I mentioned, in the next stage, when we're going to be looking at the history of the compiling of the book that is now known as the Bible, then we will look at some more specific works, such as the works from Richard Eisenman and others who spoke about James, the brother of Jesus, key to understanding the New Testament. That's a very important book. Now, of course, like I said, Vive Bon Dieu à bas Religion was published in 2000, 25 years, plenty of scholarship. Like I said, even the folks, where the PBS programs, the Frontline, that they were producing From Jesus to Christ, many in several parts. Do consult these, but realize that also we're dealing with 25 years. So this kind of quest for the historical Jesus has kind of slowed down. There are people who are talking again about yet another new quest. This is interesting that we're talking about so many efforts to try to decipher someone who would have lived only 2,000 years ago, when in fact we have so much information about folks who would have lived way longer than that. But it's not impossible, because as we know from the Haitian experience, there are many things about our own ancestors who did the Haitian Revolution that we are only verifying now because of the lack of material evidence of what they did, etc. So it's not impossible, but it's also kind of odd that outside of the Bible there is very, very little trace of Jesus. Okay, but as far as Jesus Christ, that's a completely different thing, because that was pulled together way after. And like we explained, there are many Christus that existed before, and the link between the Christian mythology and other mythologies that existed, whether it is the Kemetic mythologies, talking about how they explain the winter solstice and all of these things. All of this came afterwards, but here we wanted to deal only with the quest for a historical Jesus from the books found in the Christian Bible. Thank you very much, everyone. I encourage you to please share this material, and I look forward to seeing you at the same spot next week.
Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. For it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church.
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites.
Jésus, par ton sang précieux, enlève mon iniquité. Regarde-moi sur les cieux, dis-moi que tu m'as pardonné. J'ai longtemps erré cœur rebelle, mais j'entends ta voix qui m'appelle. Au pied de ta croix maintenant, tout confus, brisé, je me rends. Blanc, plus blanc que neige, blanc, plus blanc que neige, lavé dans le sang de l'agneau, je serai plus blanc que la neige.
Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. 1 Samuel 15. Slaves, reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the path of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. 1 Peter 2, verses 18 to 21.